In today's video, I'm talking about healing codependency in relationship, the 5 stages you need to know about in order to recover, because codependency can be really confusing without a roadmap. And that's what I'm going to give you today, so you know exactly what to do in order to make faster progress in your recovery. But first, my name is Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist, and I love helping people create relationships that work. So let's define codependency. It's basically a relationship pattern where you focus on others at your own expense. You have trouble with self-esteem, boundaries, saying no, feeling guilty, unhealthy relationships with others. There's lots of signs and symptoms of codependency, and codependency looks different on every person, which is why it can be so confusing. So the first stage of recovery is really when you realize you have the problem. You might think that everybody else has a problem, especially if you're in relationship with addicts, alcoholics, people who are narcissistic. It can be really confusing to understand that you have the problem because you are the one in pain. They don't see a problem. We think we have everybody's answers, but we don't. So the first stage of recovery is really marked by a profound sense of powerlessness. You realize that you have a problem, and by doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, you feel insane because it's not working. You're not able to get people to do what you want them to do. You can't get the love you want from outside of yourself because you're not able to give it to yourself. So the first stage of recovery is usually when we're in crisis and we're in a lot of pain. But the good news is that pain is a very big motivator in order to take action. People tend to hit bottom when a relationship ends or when they feel so overwhelmed and wiped out by taking care of other people that they're even getting sick, or they just feel emotionally so drained that they can't function really well. Those are some common examples of when people get into recovery. So the second stage of recovery is when you start to identify your own core symptoms of codependency, because it looks different on every person. But there's usually a core set of symptoms that relate to you. And that's what I want you to look at, because once you know what those core symptoms of codependency are, those core symptoms are going to create your blueprint for recovery. Because if you know that you have trouble with boundaries and self-esteem and attracting people who are really chaotic, that's going to be your starting point. And that's where you're going to start to focus your energy and your recovery, because your symptoms are going to direct the healing. So the third stage of recovery is when you assess your relationships, including the one with yourself, and your own relationship behavior, because it's super important to understand what isn't working and where your codependency is creating the most negative impact for you. Now, this can be a daunting process because looking at our relationships is where the pain is. You might start to realize that you're attracting toxic people, or you're putting up with a lot of abusive, unacceptable behavior. But this is a really important stage of recovery because that's going to help you understand what needs to change. Now, the other thing with codependency recovery is that we don't have to grow by leaps and bounds. And I think a lot of times when we're codependent, we can be really hard on ourselves and expect ourselves to be further along or done a lot quicker than we actually are. Because codependency recovery, it's a lifelong process of change. Sometimes we're super focused and then we need a break and we might come back to it later. It's really okay, because if you're in codependency recovery, you realize that this is a long haul. This is not something you're going to do in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and that's okay. If you can relate to this, say ditto in the comments, because I'm right there with you in your recovery. So the next stage of recovery is when you start to practice new healthy behaviors and you're starting to let go of those codependent patterns and you start to get some relief. This might be starting to say no, or starting to spend less time with people who don't treat you well, or starting to take better care of yourself and really developing your intuition. And all of those things are really important in codependency recovery. But again, it's baby steps. Another good one is not taking what other people say personally all the time, because you realize that what other people say is more about them than it is about you. So this fourth stage is really key, because that's when you start to see some relief by practicing new behaviors and starting to realize that your needs count. And that's super important in recovery. So the fifth stage of recovery is the stage where we're looking at family of origin issues. And this is a biggie, because this is when we're going back to the past and we're looking at how our childhood has created our codependency. And that means looking at issues of abuse, trauma, dysfunction. Maybe you had a rageful parent or someone in your background that was really abusive and really destroyed your self-esteem. All of that is part of looking at what's called FOO issues, family of origin. And this one takes some time and a lot of courage. And many people don't get there for a while in recovery, and that's okay. This is not a linear process. You don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now I'm done. Okay, that's not how recovery works. Often you'll find that you're bouncing from stage to stage, and that's okay. But the fifth one is something that you really need to be ready for. And often this is when people seek a therapist who specializes in these issues, because when you're looking at childhood and trauma, you really need extra support. Your 12-step meetings like Al-Anon and Coda, you can certainly share some of this, but they may not give you the support you need, and that's okay. Now, another thing I want to say is that some people come into recovery and they don't want to deal with their childhood for many years because they can't, because it's too painful, because they don't remember it. That's okay. Everybody gets to that stage 5 when they're ready to. And usually what happens is the pain becomes greater than the fear, and you finally realize, wow, I'm ready. I'm ready to look at my childhood. But those first 4 stages, you're going to get a lot of recovery, because part of codependency recovery is to just day by day practice new behaviors and stay open to looking at how codependency might be showing up. I know for me, I've done my codependency for many years, and there are still days that I wake up and realize, wow, I didn't realize I was codependent in this one area, and I learned something new. Now, 10 years ago, I would beat myself up for that because I thought, well, God, shouldn't I know better by now? If you've ever said that, say ditto in the comments, because we tend to beat ourselves up when we're codependent, and I don't want that for you. And part of what I had to learn to do is to realize that new symptoms are going to show up, but they may not be as painful as they were when I started, because that's where the progress is. Maybe you notice that your self-esteem just took a hit recently, but maybe it's not as bad as it was 5 years ago. So when we're in codependency recovery, we always want to track the progress. Ask yourself, is this issue better than it was 6 months ago, or last year, or 5 years ago? Because really the race that you're running is against yourself. Don't compare your recovery to other people's, because everybody has a different story and everybody has a different starting point. But you can get relief from your own codependency by going through these stages and taking better care of yourself. Now, the next thing I want you to do is go get my journal prompts on healing codependency, self-care, and starting to set boundaries, because that's going to help you a lot. Thanks so much.